Introducing a story of ambition, betrayal, and an unrelenting struggle. In a world filled with schemes, where loyalty can be bought and greed knows no bounds, one man faces the greatest challenge of his life. James Cartwright, a man born into a powerful family, forced to fight not only external enemies but also those closest to him. One stormy night, he uncovers explosive secrets that force him to choose between family and career. But can James stand strong against the dark schemes of his father, and the fractured relationships in his quest for justice? This is a story of betrayal, of greed, and decisions that change the course of destiny. But it's also a story of resurrection, of those who dare to rise when everything seems lost. So, what will James do when everything is stacked against him? Can he reclaim it all, or will it slip through his fingers? Don't miss the next episode of this story. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think James should do next? It was an evening that should have been perfect. James Cartwright, a successful tech mogul in his early 40s, sat at the Ritz-Carlton with his wife, Sophia. They had everything they could want: wealth, status, a beautiful home, and 2 wonderful children. Tonight was a celebration of James' company's latest achievement, and he had invited clients, business partners, and close friends to join in the festivities. As James scanned the room, he noticed a familiar face across the room: Lucas Thorne, a young and ambitious entrepreneur who had recently been trying to pitch James' company on a lucrative business deal. But there was something about the way Lucas and Sophia were interacting that made James' stomach churn. They were laughing a little too intimately, exchanging glances that lingered longer than usual. Sophia, his lovely wife of 12 years, who had always been the epitome of grace, seemed far too comfortable with Lucas. Their shared laughter, the way she touched his arm lightly, it all didn't sit right with James. He tried to shake off the feeling. After all, Sophia had always been loyal, hadn't she? By the end of the evening, the party was winding down, and the alcohol had started to take its toll on the guests. James was talking to a few clients when he heard raised voices coming from the bar area. Curiosity piqued, he made his way over. There, he found Lucas, drunk and staggering, whispering loudly to Sophia, unaware of James' presence. "You didn't think I'd let you go so easily, did you? You've been mine for too long." "Our kids, James' kids, they're mine too," Lucas slurred, before his eyes locked with James. "What, James? You didn't know? Your wife and I, we've been together for months. She's been hiding it from you." The shock hit James like a wave, but he didn't let it show. He calmly approached Lucas and stood in front of him, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry, Lucas," James said, his voice even. "But I think you've had a bit too much to drink." "I'm sure. You didn't mean what you just said." Sophia's face turned pale. Her eyes flickered nervously between Lucas and James. Lucas, oblivious to the danger, nodded and laughed drunkenly. "I've never been so clear in my life. You should know, James, that I've been the one to comfort her, when you were too busy with work." James turned to Sophia, his expression hardening. "Is that true?" Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her silence said everything. The drive home was eerily quiet. James couldn't look at Sophia. The betrayal weighed heavily on his mind, like a knot in his stomach. When they arrived home, he could no longer hold it in. "Tell me, Sophia. How long has this been going on?" James asked, his voice cold and detached. Sophia stood frozen, not sure how to answer. The house, once filled with warmth, now felt empty, as though the very walls had turned against her. I never meant for it to happen. I swear, it was just a mistake," she pleaded. "A mistake?" James shot back, his voice rising. "How many mistakes have there been? How many lies?" Sophia lowered her eyes. "I'm so sorry, James. I never meant to hurt you." James' jaw clenched. "You've hurt me more than you'll ever know." As the night wore on, he didn't say another word. He spent hours scouring through their shared devices and emails, piecing together the hidden truths of their affair. He had seen enough to know that the betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. The next morning, James met with his lawyer, Emily Santiago. It was clear that the next step was inevitable, a divorce, and a fight for full custody of their 2 children, Noah and Ava. James, we have the evidence. You have text messages, emails, even pictures that show Sophia's affair. You can use this to your advantage in court, Emily explained as they discussed strategy. James didn't feel relief. There was no satisfaction in knowing that he would win. It was the destruction of his family that weighed on him. But he was determined to protect his children. He wouldn't let Sophia's actions destroy their future. I want full custody. I'll fight for them, James said quietly. I don't care what it takes. Emily nodded, her expression sympathetic. You're doing the right thing. We'll make sure the courts see your side. The DNA test results came back a week later, confirming that James was the biological father of both Noah and Ava. This strengthened his case. He would not only fight for custody, but for the respect that had been stolen from him. News of the affair spread quickly. The business community, especially Sophia's close circle, turned on her. Her social standing, once untouchable, crumbled. Her charity work and connections evaporated, and she became a pariah in the circles she once dominated. Sophia tried to make amends. She reached out to James multiple times, begging for forgiveness. She apologized profusely, saying that she didn't know what had come over her. But James remained firm. He had no more words to say to her. She had broken his trust beyond repair. Sophia eventually filed a public statement admitting to her wrongdoings, but it didn't erase the damage. Her reputation, once admired, was now marred forever. James wasn't finished with Lucas either. With the help of Emily, he presented damning evidence of Lucas's unprofessional behavior at their company, mismanagement, unethical dealings, and even sexual harassment allegations. It was all uncovered. The board of directors had no choice but to fire Lucas on the spot. In a cruel twist of fate, James was offered Lucas' position, CEO of the company he had built from the ground up. It's yours, James, said the chairman of the board. You've been the heart and soul of this company. We've seen your leadership. It's time for you to take the reins. James felt no triumph in the offer. His personal life was in ruins, but professionally, he had climbed to the top. The victory felt hollow, but at least it gave him the security he needed for his children. The court hearing was long and emotional, but in the end, the ruling was clear. James was awarded full custody of Noah and Ava. Sophia was allowed limited visitation, and her access to their financial assets was severely restricted. James also received a significant portion of their shared wealth, including the house and the family business. Sophia was devastated. The life she had built, the perfect image she had carefully curated, was shattered. James settled into his new life as CEO. His days were filled with board meetings, strategy sessions, and long hours at work. But he didn't mind. The most important part of his day was when he came home to Noah and Ava. They had begun to heal, and James focused on building a strong relationship with them. Sophia, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life. She had lost everything: her family, her friends, her reputation. She tried to reconcile with James, but he refused to allow her back into their lives. The story of betrayal, pain, and triumph was far from over. James had rebuilt himself from the ground up, but there was still much more to come. Would Sophia ever redeem herself? Would James find peace with her? The answers to these questions lay in the uncertain future. Months passed, and James began to adapt to his new reality. The company flourished under his leadership, and his children, Noah and Ava, slowly adjusted to their new normal. Despite the strain, they were a family again, and James cherished the moments he could spend with them. But life, as it often does, had another curveball waiting. One afternoon, James received a cryptic email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You don't know the full truth." Inside the email was a single sentence: Sophia and Lucas weren't the only ones hiding secrets. James sat back, his heart racing. He couldn't fathom what this could mean. His life had already been turned upside down. What could possibly be left to uncover? He immediately called Emily Santiago, his lawyer and trusted confidant, and shared the unsettling message. "I'll look into it, James. We need to find out who's behind this. It could be someone close to you, or someone who has been watching your every move," Emily said, her voice cautious but determined. The mystery lingered, gnawing at James. Who was the anonymous sender? What truth had been kept from him? He began reviewing his past, his relationships, and even his business dealings with a fine-tooth comb. Then, it hit him, there were a few unusual business transactions he had dismissed over the years, things he didn't fully understand, like a series of shell companies linked to Lucas and a few high-profile board members. Emily worked tirelessly to uncover the identity of the person who had sent the email, tracing IP addresses and looking into the financial records that James had overlooked. It wasn't long before they discovered something startling. One of the board members, Claire Holden, who had supported James during his rise, had been in contact with Lucas and Sophia much more than anyone had known. In fact, Claire had been the one who had first introduced Lucas to Sophia, setting the stage for the affair. James was stunned. But there was more. Further investigation revealed that Claire had also been siphoning company funds through her connections with Lucas. This betrayal was on a scale even larger than the affair itself. Claire had orchestrated a quiet coup within the company, aiming to oust James and install Lucas as the new CEO. James' heart sank. He had trusted Claire implicitly, she had been his mentor in many ways, guiding him through the early days of his business. Now, she was revealed to be just as much a traitor as Lucas and Sophia. The next board meeting was set to be a critical one. James knew that Claire would likely try to push forward with her plan, leveraging her influence over the board to diminish his authority. But this time, James wasn't going to back down. He and Emily meticulously prepared their case, gathering irrefutable evidence of Claire's financial misconduct and betrayal. James planned to expose her in front of the entire board, revealing the full extent of her treachery. The day of the meeting arrived, and James walked into the conference room with renewed confidence. The tension in the air was palpable as the board members took their seats. Before we discuss the company's future, I have something important to share, James began, his voice steady but filled with authority. There has been a breach of trust, and it involves one of you sitting at this table. He turned to Claire, who looked stunned but quickly masked her shock with a cool, indifferent expression. Claire Holden, James continued, you've been manipulating company funds and conspiring with both Lucas Thorne and Sophia Cartwright. I've gathered all the evidence. You've been trying to sabotage me and this company for months. And your betrayal doesn't just affect me, it affects all of you, the employees, and every person who's ever trusted this company. The room was silent. Claire tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. James handed over the documents to the board members, showing them the illicit transactions, the emails, and the conspiracy. There was no denying the truth. Claire, I'm afraid your position is no longer tenable, James said, his voice cold but final. Effective immediately, you are removed from the board of directors. Claire was forced to step down. Her resignation shook the company to its core. The board members, many of whom had previously aligned themselves with Claire, were now questioning their loyalties. James, however, had proven himself stronger than any of them had imagined. After the meeting, James found himself sitting in his office, staring out the window at the city skyline. He couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come, and how much he had lost. But one thing was certain, he would never let anyone take control of his life again. Not Lucas, not Sophia, and certainly not Claire. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. We've got another lead. There's something bigger at play here. Someone higher up has been pulling the strings behind the scenes. James felt a chill run down his spine. The conspiracy was far from over. But this time, he wasn't going to face it alone. Emily, along with a new team of trusted allies, would help him navigate the growing web of corruption. James took a deep breath, focusing on the future. He had faced betrayal from those he loved and trusted most, but he had survived. Now, he had the power to rebuild, not just his company, but his life. Noah and Ava had become his greatest strength. They reminded him every day that family, loyalty, and integrity were worth fighting for. With his children by his side, James knew that he was ready to take on whatever came next. As CEO, he vowed to steer his company into a new era of transparency, fairness, and accountability. He would ensure that nothing like this ever happened again, not to him, and certainly not to the people who worked so hard to build the company. But James knew this was only the beginning. The investigation into the conspiracy had only scratched the surface. He and Emily would uncover more secrets, and James would make sure to root out every last bit of corruption. Sophia, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared from the public eye, leaving James to wonder if she would ever truly return or if she would continue to live in the shadows of her past. Perhaps, someday, they could find a way to forgive, but that day was not today. The road ahead was uncertain, but James Cartwright was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. He had learned from his losses, and now, he was ready to fight back, this time, on his terms. Weeks passed since the fallout with Claire. James thought he had dealt with the worst of it, until a new piece of the puzzle arrived. It was a phone call from Emily late one night. "James, we need to talk. This is bigger than just Claire. Someone much higher up is still involved in this whole mess." Emily's voice trembled with urgency. James, now accustomed to being pulled into unexpected battles, responded immediately. "Who is it this time?" Emily paused before replying, "It's Andrew Cartwright." James was frozen. His own father. Andrew Cartwright, the patriarch of the Cartwright family and a well-respected figure in the business world. He had always been the pillar of the Cartwright legacy, a man whose power and influence seemed untouchable. But the truth Emily was hinting at was a bitter pill to swallow. "What do you mean?" James asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "James, I think your father has been orchestrating things from the shadows," Emily continued. "He and Claire have had a much closer relationship than you ever realized, and it goes beyond business. Andrew has been a silent partner in the corruption that's been plaguing your company." The realization hit like a freight train. James had been so focused on Claire and Lucas that he had never suspected his own father of betrayal. The man who had taught him everything about business, who had set him on his path, was now implicated in a conspiracy that could ruin everything he had worked for. James couldn't ignore the growing suspicion anymore. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He started digging into his father's business dealings, checking financial records, contracts, and correspondence. The more he uncovered, the darker the story became. Andrew had been siphoning money from the Cartwright family business for years, hiding behind layers of shell companies, all of it funneled into various investments that had nothing to do with the company's future. The shock deepened when James discovered that Andrew had been secretly backing Lucas' rise in the company. It was Andrew who had nudged Lucas toward the CEO position, knowing that his own son, James, was too honest to engage in the shady business dealings Andrew had come to rely on. But when James took the reins as CEO, Andrew's grip on the company was threatened. "He's been using me all this time," James muttered to himself, the weight of the betrayal nearly unbearable. His father, his mentor, had been manipulating him from the very start. Everything James had built, every decision he had made, had been a part of Andrew's grand scheme. James knew he couldn't keep this to himself anymore. The truth had to come out. But confronting his father would not be easy. Andrew Cartwright wasn't just a business partner, he was family, and in many ways, he was the reason James had achieved so much. One evening, James arranged a private meeting with Andrew. He knew it would be a delicate situation, there was too much at stake. They sat in Andrew's office, a place James had visited countless times throughout his life. The walls were adorned with awards and pictures of their family's legacy. It was a stark reminder of everything James had hoped to uphold, yet it now felt like a museum of lies. "James, I know something is troubling you. You've been distant lately," Andrew began, his tone cool but fatherly. "What's going on?" James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Cut the act, Dad. I know everything. I know about the shell companies, the money, and your dealings with Claire and Lucas. You've been working behind my back for years, pulling the strings, and I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." Andrew's face paled. For a moment, he said nothing, his eyes betraying a flicker of panic. Then, he sighed heavily. "You never understood, did you, James?" He said quietly. "This isn't about business. It's about legacy. The Cartwright name was meant to be passed on, but you're too idealistic. You wouldn't make the hard decisions that needed to be made. You've always been too soft." James recoiled in disbelief. "So that's it? You've been pulling all these strings because you didn't think I was good enough to run the company the way you wanted?" Andrew nodded slowly. "I wanted to secure our future," James. You couldn't see the bigger picture. The decisions I made were necessary to keep the Cartwright empire thriving, even if it meant bending the rules. It was always about power. The words hit James like a slap in the face. His father's vision of success was built on corruption, lies, and manipulation. Everything James had ever stood for was in direct opposition to what his father had been willing to do to maintain control. "This empire you've built, it's all a lie, Dad. I can't be a part of it anymore. I'm going to make sure the truth gets out, and when I do, you'll have to face the consequences," James said, his voice cold and resolute. Andrew stared at him, his face a mixture of anger and regret. "Do you really think you can stop me? Do you really think the board will let you tear down everything I've built? You can't do this alone, James." James didn't care what his father thought. He had fought too hard for the truth to back down now. With Emily's help, James started to gather support from key members of the company, those who had long been loyal to him but were too afraid to speak out. He reached out to the board members who still believed in his vision for the company and began building alliances with investors who were willing to take a stand against Andrew's manipulative reign. But Andrew wasn't going to let go of his control that easily. He had too much power, too many connections. James knew the battle wouldn't be easy. This wasn't just a fight for the future of the company, it was a fight for his family, his integrity, and everything he had worked for. As the stakes grew higher, so did the risks. James was no longer just battling for his position as CEO, he was battling for his very identity, and the future of everything he held dear. As James prepared for the final confrontation with his father, he found himself standing at a crossroads. He had the power to expose Andrew's secrets, but doing so would come with a price. It could destroy not just the Cartwright legacy but also the family itself. Sophia, despite everything, reached out to James one last time. She had heard whispers about the upcoming showdown and wanted to speak with him. James didn't know whether to trust her, but part of him couldn't ignore the possibility that she, too, might be realizing the gravity of what had happened. "I know I've hurt you, James. I made a terrible mistake," Sophia said over the phone, her voice soft and remorseful. "But I don't want to see this family torn apart. Maybe it's time for us to rebuild, together." James sat silently for a moment, weighing his options. Could he forgive her? Was there still a chance for them, or was it too late? The final battle for control of the Cartwright empire was about to begin. Secrets would be exposed, alliances tested, and loyalties shattered. The question remained, could James save everything he had built, or was the family legacy doomed to fall apart? The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any other, and James knew that whatever happened next, it would change everything, for him, his family, and the company he had devoted his life to. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, James Cartwright was no longer just a businessman, he was a man ready to fight for his future. As James continued to prepare for the final showdown with his father, Andrew, the Cartwright family began to fracture more than ever. The pressure of the looming confrontation weighed heavily on everyone involved. James found himself isolated, torn between his loyalty to his family and his responsibility to the company and the people who relied on him. Sophia's unexpected call left him conflicted. She had made mistakes, yes, but there was still a part of him that remembered the woman he had once trusted. Could there be a way forward, or was the betrayal too much to overcome? Meanwhile, Andrew's power within the company was tightening. James knew his father had already begun to rally the board members who had sided with him, making promises of wealth and influence. The battle for control over the Cartwright legacy had become a public spectacle, and the media was already getting wind of the internal struggles. At home, Noah and Ava noticed the change in their father. They could sense the stress in his voice, the tension in his movements, and they began to ask difficult questions. James didn't want to drag his children further into the mess, but he knew they needed to understand the truth. One evening, after a long day, James sat down with Noah and Ava, trying to explain the situation in the simplest terms possible. "Sometimes, grown-ups have to make hard choices," James began. "Not everyone sees things the same way, and sometimes people do things that aren't right. But we always have to stay true to who we are." Noah, always the more perceptive of the two, asked, "Does that mean you're going to stop fighting?" "Dad?" James looked at his son, his heart heavy. "No, Noah. It means that even when things seem impossible, we fight to make things right. The words hung in the air, and for the first time, James wondered if the fight was worth it. Was it worth tearing his family apart over a company that had already cost him so much? While James was fighting on multiple fronts, Emily Santiago, his loyal lawyer, was making her own moves behind the scenes. Emily had uncovered something crucial, someone in Andrew's circle who was growing disillusioned with the patriarch's control. That someone was Henry, one of Andrew's oldest and most trusted allies. Henry had been in the Cartwright family's inner circle for decades, and his loyalty had always been unquestionable. But recently, his disillusionment with Andrew's corrupt practices had begun to simmer, and now, he was ready to talk. James met with Henry in secret, knowing the risks. Henry, a quiet, calculating man in his late 50s, spoke with a hushed intensity, as if afraid that even the walls had ears. "I've been in this business too long to watch it burn to the ground for nothing," Henry said. "I'm done with Andrew's games. He's too far gone, and I can't stand by him any longer." James listened carefully, his mind racing. "What do you want?" "I want out. I want to help you take him down." "But it won't be easy," Henry warned. "Andrew has too many people in his pocket. But if you play your cards right, we can turn the tide. You'll need the board members who still have a shred of decency in them." This was the break James had been waiting for. With Henry's knowledge and connections, James now had a real shot at weakening his father's influence. But there was a catch: if the plan failed, both Henry and James could be exposed to dangerous consequences. The stakes were higher than ever. James knew he had to act fast. As he began to strategize with Henry, the situation at the company was growing worse by the day. His father's public influence was unstoppable, and the pressure from the media was relentless. The only way forward was to destabilize Andrew's power base, and that meant going after the people who had been most loyal to him. It wasn't long before James discovered that one of his closest allies, Claire, had been working with Andrew all along. The woman he had once trusted to help him steer the company in the right direction had been playing both sides from the start. When Claire had sided with Andrew during the conflict, it wasn't just a matter of business, she had been looking out for herself. She knew that Andrew's influence was far-reaching, and if she played her cards right, she could secure a higher position in the company. James felt the sting of her betrayal more than he had ever imagined. Claire had been a mentor, a guiding force in his career. But now, it was clear that she had been using him to further her own ambitions. The trust between them was shattered beyond repair. As the day of the decisive board meeting approached, James found himself facing even more unexpected twists. Emily had uncovered something that could turn the entire battle in his favor, a key piece of evidence that tied Andrew to a series of illegal transactions, dating back decades. The documents revealed that Andrew had not only been siphoning company funds for personal gain, but he had also been involved in several shady land deals that could destroy the Cartwright family's public image forever. The evidence was irrefutable. If James could get it into the right hands, it would be the final blow to his father's power. But as James prepared to make his move, something unexpected happened. Lucas Thorne, the man who had been plotting against him for months, approached James with a proposition. "I know things are tense right now," Lucas said, his tone surprisingly calm. "But I'm tired of the games. I'm done with Andrew, and I'm done with this constant battle. I want out. I want to make amends, if there's any chance of it." James stared at him, disbelief written all over his face. "Why now, Lucas? After everything you've done?" Lucas sighed. "Because, at the end of the day, this company doesn't belong to Andrew or me, it belongs to the people who built it. I want to help you take him down, James." It was an offer James didn't expect, but it was one he couldn't afford to ignore. With Lucas on his side, James had a better chance of winning the support of key board members. But could he trust Lucas, after everything? The day of the board meeting arrived. Tensions were high as both sides prepared for the ultimate confrontation. James walked into the room, flanked by Emily, Henry, and Lucas, his unexpected allies. But his father wasn't alone either. Andrew had gathered a small army of loyalists, each one ready to defend his legacy. The room was filled with murmurs as the meeting began. James stood, facing the board, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The moment that would determine the future of the company, and possibly his family. I've come today not just to defend my position as CEO, James began, his voice steady, but to expose the truth. The truth about how this company has been manipulated for years by one man, my father, Andrew Cartwright. The room fell silent. James could feel the weight of every gaze on him, the tension palpable. He proceeded to lay out the evidence, Andrew's illegal activities, the financial fraud, the backroom deals. And just when he thought he had no more surprises left to reveal, Emily stood beside him, holding up one last piece of evidence. The final blow came when Emily revealed the smoking gun. Andrew had been involved in a series of offshore accounts that were linked to organized crime, using the Cartwright company's money as a front for money laundering. The board members were stunned. One by one, they turned to Andrew for answers, but there was no defense, no plausible explanation. The fallout was immediate and severe. Andrew was removed from the company, his reputation destroyed. His assets were frozen, and the Cartwright legacy was forever tarnished. James had done the unthinkable, he had defeated the man who had been his mentor and his greatest rival. But as James took his seat as CEO once again, the battle wasn't over. There were still enemies lurking in the shadows, and the future of the company remained uncertain. James knew that he had just begun to fight for the future he wanted, for himself, for his children, and for the people who believed in him. And as the dust settled, James Cartwright knew one thing for sure, the road ahead was still full of challenges. But he was ready for whatever came next. Months passed after the board meeting that ultimately ousted Andrew Cartwright from the company. James was back in control, but the triumph felt hollow. The weight of the decisions he had made, the betrayals he had uncovered, and the family he had nearly lost were still pressing on him. Sophia, who had tried to reconcile with him, became more distant as James settled into his new role. The company was in disarray, its reputation fractured by the exposure of Andrew's wrongdoings, and now it was up to James to rebuild. But as the weeks wore on, it became clear that the hardest part wasn't taking control of the company, it was finding peace with the people he loved most. One evening, James was meeting with Emily and Lucas at the office late into the night. The new leadership at Cartwright Enterprises was slowly starting to stabilize, but there were still lingering issues that needed addressing. "I've been thinking a lot about how we move forward," Emily said, breaking the silence. "The company's reputation will take years to repair, and there are still people loyal to your father who might try to undermine you. You need to be prepared for anything." "I know," James replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "But I've done the hard part. I've exposed the truth, and I've won the board's trust. There's no turning back now." But Emily wasn't done. She hesitated before speaking again. "James, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you sooner." James looked up, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes avoiding his. "Lucas, he's been playing both sides. He's been feeding information to your father's camp while pretending to work with you." James froze. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Lucas, the man who had sworn allegiance to him, the one who had helped bring down Andrew, was now revealed to be an insider for the enemy. "How long?" James demanded, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Longer than you think," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's been planning to take over the company from the inside. His loyalty was never to you, James. It was always about power." James couldn't comprehend it. The one person he had trusted the most, the man who had helped him expose his father's corruption, had been plotting against him all along. James didn't waste any time. He called Lucas into his office the next morning. The confrontation was inevitable, but James had no idea how deeply the betrayal had cut until he saw Lucas walking through the door, his expression calm, almost rehearsed. "James, I know what you're thinking, but let me explain," Lucas began, as soon as he sat down. James slammed his fist on the table. "Explain. Explain how you've been feeding my father information all along, Lucas. How you've been playing both sides, pretending to be my ally while stabbing me in the back." Lucas didn't flinch. Instead, he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't have a choice. This company was always about power, James. You just couldn't see it. Your father had the vision. You were always too idealistic. I could have helped you, but you were too blind to realize we could make a fortune if we just followed the right path. I've been doing this for myself, for us. Don't you dare say, US, James shot back. I trusted you, Lucas. I thought we were in this together. But you were only in it for yourself. You think you can just manipulate me like my father did? That's where you're wrong. Lucas leaned forward, his eyes cold. I'm not the one who's wrong, James. You've been fighting a losing battle. You can't win against me, and you certainly can't win against your father. I've already won, Lucas, James said, his voice steady with finality. And I'm about to make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been up to. With Emily and the board's support, James quickly orchestrated Lucas' removal from the company. The evidence of his betrayal was damning, and Lucas had no choice but to step down from his position. The media buzzed with the news, and for the first time in months, James felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. But even as he regained control, he knew that the real battle wasn't over yet. Andrew Cartwright may have been out of the company, but his influence was still lingering in the shadows. James knew that the fight for Cartwright Enterprises wasn't just about winning the boardroom, it was about proving that he could build a future without relying on the toxic power dynamics his father had created. But the personal cost of all the turmoil weighed on him. Sophia had stayed distant, and his relationship with Noah and Ava had been strained. The fight for the company had come at the expense of his family, and James was beginning to wonder if it had been worth it. One afternoon, as he was sitting in his office, contemplating the future, he received a call from Sophia. James, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know if we can ever fix things between us. But I've been thinking about everything, and I'm so sorry for what happened. I can't change the past, but I want to try again. If you'll let me. James closed his eyes, a wave of emotions flooding over him. The years of betrayal, the pain of losing trust, the fear that it was all too late, they all rushed in. But beneath it all, there was a small spark of hope. Sophia, he began, his voice quiet. I've made so many mistakes, too. But I want to try, if you do. We don't have to fix everything overnight. But we can start somewhere. With Lucas and Andrew out of the picture, and the company beginning to stabilize, James finally felt like he was taking control of his life again. He focused on rebuilding Cartwright Enterprises, forging a new path that was grounded in integrity and transparency. The toxic legacy of his father's influence was fading, and with Emily's help, James began to implement reforms that would ensure the company was held accountable to the public and its employees. Sophia, after months of emotional distance, began to return to his life in small, meaningful ways. They didn't have all the answers, but they were both willing to try. Their children, Noah and Ava, were growing up fast, and James knew that the best way he could secure a future for them was by leading with honor, and by showing them that family was just as important as business. The road ahead was uncertain, but James was no longer the idealistic young man who had first inherited the Cartwright name. He had been tested by the harshest trials, and now, as he moved forward, he knew that his true strength came from within. He had won not just the battle for the company, but the battle for his soul. James has fought through some of the greatest challenges of his life, but can he truly overcome all the threats waiting for him ahead? Will the decisions he makes next help him reclaim everything, or will they only complicate matters further? But the journey of James Cartwright is far from over. Secrets, conspiracies, and the battle for power still haunt him. And you, what do you think about the decisions he will face in the next chapter? Don't forget to hit like if you're enjoying the story, and share the video so your friends can join in on this journey too. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What path do you think James will choose next? We'd love to hear from you. And make sure to click subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of this thrilling, unpredictable journey. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.